Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Malapane Walker, and welcome to the Farming Podcast brought to you by Private Property. Today we are talking about small-scale farming, commercializing small-scale farmers. So in whichever geographic you're in and you feel like you're a small-scale farmer, I think this conversation is for you because we are going to go through some of the important topics with regards to what is small-scale farming, how can we commercialize small-scale farmers, and what are the things that small-scale farmers need in order to get to that commercial status. So even if you're working with small-scale farmers, I also think this conversation is for you because I believe that you'll get some points that you can apply in your programs as you're assisting small-scale farmers to make them more commercial. And we have a guest who is extremely experienced and knowledgeable and has first-hand on-the-ground experience working with small-scale farmers or emerging farmers, whichever title or terminology you prefer to use. But he's worked with a number of farmers in various geographic regions across South Africa, and that is none other than Malapane Thamaga. But before we introduce Malapane, I just want to mention that please continue to like, share, and comment on our live podcast and post our live podcast, which will be on our YouTube channel under the Farming Podcast playlist under the Private Property YouTube channel. And so we can answer questions that we may have missed onto the show because sometimes you just only have 30 minutes and, we want to give the guests enough time for them to give us that information that we need so that, we could go home and just really take some key points and learning lessons and apply them to our agribusinesses or to our farms. And not to also forget that we still have the Sherlock Holmes competition running. All the details are on our website. It is about a riddle pertaining to a specific property. And every week we give away or announce who the winner is for that specific week. And I think we should just get straight into it. Malapane, how are you doing?
Good evening, Bali, and thank you for inviting me. So I must say that I'm a big fan, actually, of your podcast. I've been following it. It's very informative. It's what is needed actually in the industry. So thank you very much for upping the game, and getting to inform farmers about what is happening in the industry.
Thank you so much, Malapane. That means a lot. Tell me about the work that you do in this sector before we get to speak about small-scale farmers and getting them to commercial status.
So my work, I work mainly with emerging farmers, black farmers, as some would like to be called. I've been involved with AFASA, mainly at the national level, where we do a lot of advocacy, and lobbying on behalf of farmers. This is more around policy advocacy to ensure that, our farmers are well represented when it comes to anything that has to do with farming. So I've since realized that our farmers need or have a challenge with bread and butter issues, day-to-day issues when it comes to farming. Then I've decided that maybe it's about time that I take what I have to the ground. So recently we're working directly with farmers. If you are a farmer, you are in a specific area, you need to get yourself commercialized. I guess I'll be the best person to talk to. But typically, our approach is to follow a cluster approach. So we don't necessarily work with individual farmers, but we prefer to work with group farmers because then they leverage on each other.
Wow, thank you. And we hear the term quite often. I mean, commercialization or commercial farmers are typically viewed as the white farmers, and emerging farmers are typically viewed as black farmers. But I believe maybe there are emerging farmers who are white, colored or Indian, and there are commercial farmers who are black, colored or Indian as well. But specifically focusing on that word commercialization, what does commercialized farmer mean?
So basically, the easiest way one can explain, commercializing emerging farmers is if you understand two main categories of farmers at the extreme, one being a subsistence farmer on one end, and one on the other being a fully fledged commercial farmer. A subsistence farmer is a farmer who produces mainly for home consumption for food security purposes, whereas a commercial farmer will be your big guy with high turnover, with all the resources they need, and they are very resilient in their production. So when we speak commercialization, it's mainly moving from subsistence towards a fully fledged commercial farmer.
Okay, and maybe taking out the resources that are available for farmers in their fields, could commercial also mean, take example, a farmer who is selling directly to retail, whether it's even franchise stores, the local greengrocer, maybe like restaurants, etc. Can that farmer be viewed as commercial as well, just selling to formalized businesses along the agri-value chain?
So basically, the concept of commercialization is around how much of proportion of your produce do you sell to the market? Do you produce just for consumption, or do you produce to sell? Whether it's informal or it's formal, as long as you're selling a portion of your produce, then you're regarded as a commercial farmer. It's only about the degree as to how far are you commercial in terms of resources, in terms of turnover, in terms of the size of the land you're producing on, as well as the number of employees you have on your farm.
Wow, okay. And what does the term small-scale farmer mean? Am I a small-scale farmer if I'm farming on 2 hectares or 10 hectares? Am I a small-scale farmer if, I'm generating like 10,000 Rand a month, 1,000 Rand a month? Am I a small-scale farmer who's producing maize but only getting 2 tons per hectare? Just give us examples as to what exactly does the term small-scale farmer mean?
So even in the agricultural economics, space, the terminology small-scale farmer is really still, being figured out, especially if you look at it as well from a point of view of emerging farmer. But Prof. Kirsten from the University of Stellenbosch has come up with a figure to say if you're producing anything less than 500,000, you're considered, a small-scale farmer. So a turnover of 500,000 annually will be a small-scale farmer, and then if you are above that, then you're kind of commercial. And sometimes this is confused with maybe the size of the land you have. You can have a big size of the land, but in terms of turnover, or depending on the agroecological zone you find yourself, then you are limited. For instance, a farmer in the Karoo, or sitting on a 100-hectare farm, will not necessarily have the similar benefits as a farmer who's in Mpumalanga, for instance, in the same size of land. So it's the idea around turnover, I think, is quite a fair one.
Yeah. All right. And, we speak about turnover. So like you mentioned, 500,000 less. So small scale farmer is irrelevant to the size of land that you're farming on. Is that what you're saying as well?
So there are a number of elements, variables that are thrown in when you deal with this categorization of farmers. So one will be your turnover, as we've spoken about. Another will be about the size of the land. Another will be on efficiency in terms of production, your tons you produce per hectare, or the number of your efficiency in terms of production when it comes to vegetables. So there are a number of variables that are thrown in. I think, the fair one will be a turnover for me.
This is quite interesting because, I moved from a 14-hectare farm, right, to a 2-hectare farm. Okay. And so from 14 hectares to 2 hectares. But the scale of my production within that 2 hectares, I've converted this farm, this 2-hectare farm, into a 1-hectare greenhouse production. And every time clients come through or input suppliers come through, they say, wow, this is a massive production, and because it's one hectare undercover. So particularly, some people would say, oh, she's farming in small scale, perhaps maybe in global terms. I'm farming in small scale based on the land size, but however, the production is commercial because of the volumes and tonnage that I'm able to produce in my crops, and the way in which I am producing, and obviously far exceeding the 500,000 turnover. So is it wrong to say sometimes that small scale, taking revenue out, outside of this conversation, small scale is just small scale based on who's viewing it at whichever lens they're interpreting it? Because I consider myself farming on a small scale, but then when some people present me that say she's a commercial farmer, and then similarly another Mbali in, I don't know, somewhere else farming on 2 hectares, open field, they would also be considered a small scale.
So Mbali, it differs. In most cases, these terminologies, they're just thrown around depending on who you're talking to. And in some cases, they are being used because one wants to, get a hand on a funding or another. Mm-hmm. But in actual fact, everything depends on your production. If you are doing intensive farming on your 2 hectare, and you are able to make that mark that we've spoken about, then you can regard yourself as a commercial farmer, especially if you're doing your cash crops. Similarly, when you're doing poultry, these are more intensive commodities. But if you were to produce maize on that 2 hectare, definitely you'll be a small scale farmer.
Yeah, and I suppose 2 hectare would purely be for individual or household consumption.
Exactly.
Yeah, because of the type of the crop. And so why is it important to make small scale farmers commercial? So going back to the examples that we alluded to in terms of turnover, in terms of growing for subsistence use, why is it important to graduate small scale farmers to commercial status?
So given the history of our country, the legacies of apartheid, so it's now about time that we get to have more of synergies, of this country. Yes, so that even the young aspiring farmers, they can look at the already existing farmers and say, I want to be like that one. But from an economic point of view, we know where we are sitting in terms of unemployment rates. And if you look at the chapter 6 of the NDP, agriculture is listed among the top sectors which have high potential for job creation. So it's important that we get to graduate our farmers from being small scale to commercial so that they create those employment, they increase their turnover, but as well assist in terms of, this new emerging agribusinesses, There are currently some newly emerging agribusinesses, and I like how the youth is involved around that. So typically here it will be a farmer thinking beyond just production or beyond just primary production, looking at value addition, looking at, being innovative around packaging and all other things that are necessary to increase, the presence of their products.
Wow. And could it be that, some small scale farmers really don't have the appetite to be commercial? Because, once you go to big business means more problems, and it's all about the strategy or the appetite of the individual.
Definitely. There are people who are into farming just for the love of it, and they are not necessarily looking at it as a business. But it's about time that maybe we change the mindset of those type of people. Even of our parents back home, they're just comfortable having their 10 goats and they just want to stop there. Yeah. But if you look at some ideas like what the late Dr. Vuyo Mahlati has done in the Eastern Cape around Ivili Loboy, you don't necessarily have to have big head for you to be commercialized. It's more about, tapping into opportunities that exist even within the small scale that you're operating in.
Right. So with the farmers that you've worked with on the ground, what are the new developments of that you're seeing with all these emerging farmers? Where is their interest lying into? What are the opportunities that are existing for these emerging or small scale farmers?
So majority, they are continuing with what it's already, out there. People like to copy each other. If I'm producing cabbages, another one want to produce cabbage. And this is where I want to challenge farmers to think beyond the box and say, what are other products that, we grew up eating and are not necessarily available in your retail store? This is another thinking around commercialization to say, how do you go about commercializing marula, for instance? How do you go about commercializing your moringa? Now with COVID, we've heard about lengana being shown on the road. So how do you then make it in such a way that it's appealing? You add value to that. And in the process, you have farmers on the ground who are producing for this emerging agribusiness, which is geared towards, this new crops.
Yeah. So we spoke about commercializing small-scale farmers, and you mentioned certain avenues in terms of how we can make them commercial. I want to find out, speaking on even the opportunities that exist for small-scale farmers, moringa and the likes, I want to find out how exactly can we make them commercial? Like just tapping into the practical stuff. Because like we're saying, to be commercial, you have to think bigger in terms of production, in terms of resources, which is equipment, input costs, etc. And you have to think bigger in terms of the clientele that you have to sell, So how exactly could we make small-scale farmers commercial? What are some of the interventions that we can plow into their productions?
So there are different approaches that we can get into this, and one of them is a farmer approaching, an already existing farmer or someone they look up to, and talking to them about how they navigated around this farming, endeavor, because it can be quite a challenging one, and in the process, that a commercial farmer can end up becoming a mentor to this farmer, and in a way, this small-scale farmer can start to kind of commercialize. Another, option will be these small guys now coming together and say, what are the common things that we can work on as a collective? So here we're looking at, for instance, say vegetable farmers saying, we go all the way far, 100 kilometers to get our seedlings. How about we have our own nursery? We lack resources in terms of storage facilities. How about we put in a storage facility that we can use as a collective? But thirdly, it's around, commercializing emerging or small-scale farmers around this emerging agribusinesses. One good example, it's a Timbali. If anyone who has got chance, they can go online and look at the work that they have done here. It's a partnership between an incubation platform and emerging farmers who are interested in flower production. So here, an incubator will assist farmers in terms of technicalities around how do you go about the farming flowers and making sure that you produce quality, as well as, increasing the shelf life of this flower so that they are geared for, as far as your export market. So there could be different ways in which, you can go about this. But my favorite one is around, emerging agribusinesses. We have, for instance, there's a lady who approached us while I was at the FASA from Hamarishana. She's working with communal farmers, community women there. They're producing, they call it Sejong tea. So this is tea that has always been there, within community, but now they're looking at how they can take it further. So firstly, they had to patent that, and then now you can find it in your store. And there's another fellow in your Sasolburg who is commercializing morogo, tepe. So what they're doing is that they're canning morogo as we know it, so that they can increase the shelf life of morogo. And in the process, then morogo that we've always been eating as we grow up, farmers can produce get for markets instead of just for consumption. So there are lots of these examples that you can duplicate around.
Wow, I like the fact that you've mentioned these examples, because another thing, whether small-scale farmers or just farmers in general, always complain about accessing markets. And I know COVID-19 has been a big disruptor for a number of farmers, whether small-scale or commercial. It's disrupted a number of businesses, because you have farmers who have been producing herbs for the longest of times and selling into retail. And what we saw with COVID is that, selling into restaurants. And what we saw with COVID is that restaurants were closed for a number of months. And you found that those herb farmers started struggling with where to sell their product. And, herbs are quite high value. And a lot of the farmers lost in this. Similarly with lettuce farmers or small cherry tomato farmers, they could not sell these products when COVID struck, and people started scrambling for alternative markets. And I like the fact that you've mentioned all these different opportunities, if one could put it that way. Canning morogo, and I suppose canning spinach could be the same. Exactly. When spinach or morogo has been hit by hail or frost, maybe if you could still recover part of that production, you could look at processing it and putting it in pillow packs and sending it out to a new set of clientele. So thank you for bringing these examples of small-scale farmers. I want to find out as well, what type of support exists for small-scale farmers? You spoke about incubation or incubators. Are there a lot of incubators, especially in the agricultural industry? And what type of support exists for small-scale farmers?
So, the concept of incubations, I really like it, because, it brings about a whole lot of, solution for a farmer, which may, in their individual capacities, they are unlikely to do them in their own. Firstly, formalizing your business, having to register your business with your CIPC, doing your tax filing, handling your HR issues, those are, you're probably doing that as a farmer as well, Bali. And in the case of incubation, typically, those are some of the things that get to be centralized. So as farmers operating in your own area, own space, producing, being clustered in an area, but you have this host in the form of an incubator who is able to assist you with all this technical support. But in addition to that, we do have our extension officers, but here and there, there are challenges with regard to that, and in a whole lot of farmers are not happy in how they go about their work. But I feel like it's about time that we look from within. In most cases we always look from the outside to say who can come in and assist me. But if we look from within and say, I am a pig farmer, I have a neighbor who is a pig farmer, but collectively, what can we do? Instead of us looking at each other as competitors, but we look at how we can leverage on what we do, how we can complement each other, and see how we can collaborate in areas where we have common challenges in.
Yeah, and we always talk about challenges that farmers are faced with, but specifically on our tonight's conversation, I want to find out what are some of the common mistakes that exist or that small-scale farmers do in their operations. You've alluded to one, having to register or formalize your business. I get that sometimes when people ask, should I register my business or should I run this small-scale production just, informally because it's quite small? So what are some of the mistakes that maybe you've also experienced from other farmers who are small scale on the ground, that you've seen that, this is a common mistake. A lot of people keep repeating this, and therefore it shouldn't be done like this. It should be done in a different direction.
One of the common mistakes is farmers conveniently getting into cooperatives, because then they want to position themselves for funding, and you find that as soon as they get funded, the cooperative, collapse, because in the first place, the people who came together to get into this business, they did not have similar mindset. Some, they only exist when there's money. As soon as money disappears, they also disappear. So we have to, I even run away from using the terminology cooperative. I think of it as clustering, in a sense that you're producing your own thing, barley, in your own farm. Another farmer is doing the same thing on their own farm, but they come together, whenever they have this common issues. The same way this cooperatives we have today have come about is because farmers were doing their own things on their own farm, but they came together and say, we lack market, we lack value addition, and therefore your BKBs can come and assist in that regard.
Yeah. So if I understand you correctly, is that the biggest mistake is small-scale farmers coming together as cooperatives to be able to access funding, because they are of the impression that if we come in numbers, then surely a corporate entity or a government department will fund us.
Definitely. Another, common mistake that small-scale farmers get into is just producing without doing research about where they're going to sell their products to. I get a lot of calls, people saying, I'm sitting here with so much of cabbages, I don't know where to take my cabbages to. So things have changed. Previously, during apartheid government, we had board which were able to manage that. But now we are operating in a free market where you firstly have to know where you're going to sell your produce to before you can even produce. That is also a common mistake.
Wow. Before we sum up our conversation and conclude for this evening, I just want to mention some comments here. We've got Mahlangu Liam Moya that says, it's good to be here. Thank you. So it's great to see that someone's finding value in this conversation. Liam, I don't know if you're a farmer, but if you are, I'm glad that this conversation tonight with Malapane is bringing value to you. And we also have a comment here by Sikhala Yunus. Great conversation, guys. I'm jotting down some points. And this is the reason why we have this farming podcast, right, Malapane, for people to take notes, for people to apply it into their own agribusinesses or into their businesses. And we do have a lot of individuals who aspire to start farming, individuals who started farming in their backyard gardens, etc., and say that they have such a passion for green fingers. But it's great to see that this conversation is hitting home and is quite valuable to our audience this evening. Just to conclude our conversation, Malapane, I just want to find out then, or rather, what advice could you give to any small-scale farmer or soon to be a farmer, let's say startup farmer, coming into the industry, whether they want to start with livestock, crops, grains? What advice would you give a person wanting to start farming or a small-scale farmer about farming production today?
So I'll say 3 recommendations as a start. Firstly, do your research, read, about what you want to get yourself in. Secondly, look for people who are in the space that you want to get into. If Mbali is nearby you, it's a farmer who you aspire to be like, go meet Mbali, ask her how she got to where she got, so that you don't do the same mistakes as she did. And thirdly, I would like to encourage our farmers to form study groups. Study groups play a very crucial role. These are typically, a group of farmers who meet, say, once a month. They can choose to say, we meet every Wednesday, the first Wednesday of the month. This will be typically your say, piggery farmers who decide that we meet to discuss this and that about our production, or conveniently it could be just farmers within same in area, and say we're going to invite guests from time to time, and this is where information get to be shared, because information really is lacking, especially in your far rural areas. People really get to know about issues when it's too late. It's during these study groups that farmers get to share a lot of information about their production.
Wow. Thank you, Malapane, for such an insightful conversation. I really, really appreciate everything that you've said tonight. And that is something I also take for granted, actually, study groups, connecting with other farmers, speaking with other farmers, talking about our challenges, how can we improve our operations, especially farmers that are in and around our community. Because at the end of the day, I believe that even if I'm a vegetable farmer, even if I'm speaking to a livestock farmer, grain farmer, fruit trees farmer, or citrus farmer, or an avocado farmer, macadamia nuts, you name it, I feel like we all have similarities in our businesses because we are all in farming and we're all governed by Mother Nature to some extent. So study groups or just having a small farmer network is definitely crucial in any farmer's developments. But yeah, thank you so much for your insights, and I wish you all the best with the work that you're doing with emerging farmers. Yeah, trust me, a lot of farmers need a lot of help from any corners of the earth, and congratulations to you for obviously taking this mammoth task. And obviously being a person who is a point of reference or a go-to person for many farmers comes with a lot of responsibility, I know. And so that's the reason why I'm saying, congrats, because you're doing a lot. And I suppose making a huge difference, because a lot of support is still needed in this industry, most importantly to emerging or small-scale farmers. So thank you for your contribution.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mbali, and congratulations to you. I think what you're doing through the podcast is really very important. Now, living in the techno era, these messages get to reach all corners of the country. If you can't catch it live, you're then able to catch it later on, whenever you can be able to access this information. You're really doing a great job, Mbali. Keep going, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Before our audience gets cross with us, there's actually one question that just popped up last minute. Eunice wants to know, can you advise regarding how to keep track of your finances, or rather the sales of your products, example for crop production? So I think she's talking pretty much on keeping a track record of finances or the sales that she has made for the day.
So that is another area which is very lacking, Bali. I think you're going to need a whole podcast to be able to assist farmers when it comes to record keeping. It's not necessarily only about sales, but it's also about what you've done on the farm. If you have been, culling your cattle, you should be able to record whatever operation you have done on your farm. So I think we need a whole podcast to be able to clarify that. But by mere having a book where you keep track of what is going on your farm, who is owing you, how much you have sold on that specific day, it's a good start. But for those who need a comprehensive assistance in that regard, they're welcome to can engage me, or they can go to CEDA. The CEDA does provide, such assistance, where a farmer can sit, and go through a training around, record keeping when it comes to their financials or when it has to do with their operation on the farm.
Wow, that's it. So maybe we might invite you back to speak about record keeping in more detail. But thank you so much, and have a good evening, Malapane.
Thank you so much, Mbali, and thanks once more for inviting me.
Great. That was Malapane Thamaga, who's an independent economist who is currently working with a number of emerging farmers across the country, assisting them with a number of inquiries and things that emerging farmers are faced with on a daily basis. And I think most importantly, just providing some practical advice on how to grow their enterprises. And so, I believe that this conversation is quite insightful, especially for small scale farmers, or especially if you want to start farming. He mentioned pretty much practical steps that as a farmer you could take advantage of, whether you're forming part of study groups so that you could grow your business, doing enough research, whether you want to start into the agricultural sector, and most importantly, how to become commercial. Becoming commercial, yes, means that increasing your production, increasing the size of your production, maybe starting to supply to formalized markets instead of farming more subsistence on a subsistence level. And so if you miss some of these points, you can really watch this conversation on our YouTube channel post this live. However, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you so much for interacting. It was nice to get messages for once, just so that we can keep knowing that, these shows and this podcast is bringing value to you. So thank you so much to everybody that has commented this evening, and I wish you a good night, and I'll see you next week, Tuesday.